Hello and welcome to the second module of the Service First online workshop. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lyra Matthews and I am the Service First Coordinator for the state of Colorado. With me is Jeff Bradybaugh from the National Park Service, who I will introduce in just a moment. First, I'd like to go over a couple logistical items with you. The Service First workshop is 2 days, 3 hours each day. We have started the second module. This module, the remaining session today and the first 2 sessions tomorrow, will cover, will be presentations from experts in the field who will discuss their Service First experience in a thematic area. They will talk about best management practices, their ideas for the future, and issues and concerns in that area. The session will be 55 minutes long. We will have 20 minutes for Jeff's presentation, and then we will have about 30 minutes for questions from you and any ideas you have for Service First in the future. Those ideas you send us will help shape Service First in the future, as well as be presented in the final session tomorrow. We hope that you will send us your questions. We've had the address for that going at the bottom of the screen during the presentation, so please send in your questions as they come. The workshop is being streamed to over 175 locations within the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. At the end of this session, I'm going to ask each location to type the number of people participating in that session into the question box so that we can have a count of how many people are participating in addition to all of the locations. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Jeff Bradybaugh. Jeff has worked for the National Park Service for 30 years. In the course of that time, he's worked collaboratively with other land management agencies on cooperative watershed management, oil and gas development, cave resource protection, and wildlife management, among many others. He detailed for several weeks in the Federal Aviation Administration Regional Office in Seattle to collaborate on airport planning and park soundscape protection. Before transferring to his current post as Superintendent at Bryce Canyon National Park, Jeff was Superintendent at Grand Canyon Parashon National Monument, a unit jointly managed by Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service. With that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Just to start off with, I know there are many practitioners of Service First joining us today, and we hope that you'll ask some questions as we go along. For those of you that may be new to Service First concepts and the authorities, we'll go through a couple of points here just to start off that might help you orient to that a little bit. First of all, the Service First legislation allows us to work jointly on various projects and planning and other activities. It also allows us to manage our human resources together across the agencies and to transfer and manage funds to support those activities. So why do we do these things? Well, of course, we feel that agencies, when they're working together, can accomplish more. And of course, as the deputy directors mentioned, we have many management issues and concerns that are transboundary in nature. And so we need to work together on those things. It provides an opportunity for better public service, operational efficiencies, and in these days of constrained funding, those operational efficiencies are definitely necessary. So I'll draw from some specific examples from our experiences at Grand Canyon Parashon National Monument. The monument was created by presidential proclamation in January of 2000. It includes lands under the administration of the Bureau of Land Management's Arizona Strip District and lands in Lake Mead National Recreation Area, a National Park Service unit. The joint management was not particularly prescribed in the monument proclamation, but a tribute to the managers at the time, they realized that to accomplish the mission as identified in the monument proclamation, they would need to work very closely together. And that joint management evolved to cooperative management, and I would say at this time to a very collaborative management situation. But it takes a concerted effort to make that happen. It takes leadership, direction, and emphasis. It takes the development of interpersonal relationships. And it takes folks that look for opportunities to work together and to collaborate on various activities. So initially, when the monument was created, the first BLM monument manager referred to it as a shotgun marriage, and he did that in mirth, certainly. But his meaning was that, of course, that each of us in our agencies have a culture that develops in our agency, a way of doing business, a way of conducting projects and programs. And so there needed to be kind of a rallying around this joint new mission. Not to ignore the missions of the two agencies, but to focus very clearly on what the monument's mission was as described in the proclamation. Also an effort to find the right people. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But again, these are people that look to work together, they're good team players, that sort of thing. And a need to establish new lines of communication. Of course, in our agencies, we're very familiar with how things proceed and have means of communicating. So when we're realigning and joining together, we have to make sure that those new lines of communications are built very strongly. And then as the monument was being staffed, we had to look at position management and very clearly define the responsibilities of positions as they affected both agencies and the new monument mission. So moving into integration, again, the cross-agency supervision was important. As the National Park Service Superintendent at Parashot Monument, I supervised employees from both agencies. The BLM Monument Manager did the same. But we had to be very careful that we didn't put our employees in a situation where they felt like they had more than one supervisor. And that was very important. I think there was a question earlier about co-location to the deputy directors. And we found that co-location of the staff in a single office was very important. It helps to develop camaraderie, focus on the mission of that unit, and develop those new lines of communication. And one thing, too, that we found as we were getting into a collaborative management situation or a service-first situation is realize that budgets will wax and wane. We all know that as federal managers. And at times the funding is going to be disproportionate. But we can't let that get in the way of our collaborative management. All of us can bring various resources to the table, whether it's funding or expertise in our human resources. And speaking of human resources, again, we found that we needed to define position responsibilities very carefully. Our new positions in the monument covered all lands for both agencies. For example, a wildlife biologist was a wildlife biologist for the monument, not just for the National Park Service lands or the Bureau of Land Management lands. So again, position responsibilities had to be carefully defined. And we talked a little bit earlier about clearly designating supervisors. When we bring our agencies together, each of the employees is employed by a specific agency. And where there is cross-supervision going on, we need to make sure that those employees are reporting to one supervisor, that they aren't getting mixed messages and such. And as I mentioned earlier, selecting staff predisposed to collaboration is important. The teamwork aspects when forming a service-first organization are very important, and we need to search out folks that look for opportunities for collaboration. And also, in a new organization or a new service-first unit, it's important to look at our appointment authorities and perhaps test out some positions to see how they're going to shake out in a new organization. So there are various mechanisms to do that, whether we look at term positions or IPA assignments or details, those sorts of things. So we probably don't want to tie up all our positions on a permanent basis right away. You may want to hold some back for testing how some of these things work. And then financial resources, of course, are very important to the success of any unit. And what we found is very important to understand the sharing mechanisms. In collaborative management, joint management, service-first management, our ability to share funding is very important. We have to understand our appropriated funds and our non-appropriated funds, whether the appropriated funds are single year or multi-year. When we're developing agreements, those things are important. For example, nearly all of the Park Services appropriated funds are single-year appropriations. So when we're working on joint projects or activities that might be multi-year in duration, we need to keep in mind that there are single-year and multi-year appropriations funding coming together. And then, of course, we have non-appropriated funds, various fee receipts. Each agency has its rules, its policies on how these things are utilized. And so for a service-first manager, you need to understand all those rules for the two or more agencies that are working jointly. And of course, we need to understand the authorities for our agreements. Our departments and our agencies all have various authorities under which we transfer money through agreements. We also have authorities under which we accept grants and other things. So we need to understand those authorities. And of course, the Economy Act works across all of our agencies for intergovernmental orders. One of the things that we had the privilege of participating in the testing of at Parashant National Monument was a service-first transfer request, which is essentially a Treasury-level transfer of funding. And I think this will probably come up a little bit later in the discussions, but Chris may want to give us an update on where we are relative to experimenting with that. But it is a simplified means of moving funds between the agencies for a particular activity, whether it be for covering the cost of building leases, as we did at Parashant, or perhaps covering the cost of a position. And then, of course, there are special initiatives at various levels and grant opportunities through partners. One of the things that we talk about often is adaptive management, and I think it's very important when establishing particularly a new service-first organization, but certainly for units that have been involved in it for a while. We do our planning, we do our project implementation, but the very important step is the assessment. How well did that work? Are we getting feedback from our employees or from our customers about our activities and how well things are working? And so this feedback mechanism is very important. As we start out, particularly in a new service-first organization, there will be a lot of adaptation and change over the first few years until folks become more comfortable with the operation. There are three very essential inputs to this adaptive management framework, and one of those, and absolutely crucial, is management support at all levels above the local unit. I just can't emphasize how important that was for us at Parashant National Monument, having the support up the line in the excuse me, the Bureau of Land Management and in the National Park Service. Of course, we talked about shared funding and personnel. Those inputs are critical. And personal engagement. Staff and managers have to be engaged and understand that particularly in a new service-first organization, that there will be adaptations and that there will be change. The organization won't be created once and then be static. So I guess one of the points I'd like to make is that collaborative management is an attitude. It's a way of doing business. And Service First is a mechanism to achieve it. It's a mechanism that we have authority to utilize. I'm going to go to a couple of examples right now for Parashant Monument. The first one's going to be concerned with cave management, and perhaps you can see the slide in the upper right-hand corner there. Who was to know that under a desert landscape we had these beautifully adorned wet caves? But once we found that out, we found we have 1 million acres that needed to be inventoried for potential cave resources. So our Park Service and BLM specialists got together, developed a joint proposal to do a helicopter inventory, actually, of cave openings in the monument, so we could initiate inventory. This was jointly funded by both the Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management. A good example of folks working together and seeking funding through both agencies. As we proceeded with the cave inventory, we also began some biological inventories within the cave that have to date yielded 3 species of organisms previously unknown to science. And I can tell you there are several vials with critters in them that have not yet been taxonomically examined, so there are some opportunities beyond that. But this was a great effort with a partnership through the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit at Northern Arizona University. We entered into a research agreement with them. We were able to secure Park Service funding for that project. And this is a good example of what I mentioned earlier about disproportionate budgeting. We happened to be able to get the funding for the research project through the Park Service, but the logistical needs and the technical support that was necessary to access these very remote caves was supported extensively by BLM, both in terms of staffing expertise and other logistics. So even though the funding wasn't equally shared, the effort was. And of course, with our cooperative and collaborative management, it's not just our agency partners. We have local communities, our state agencies, and conservation organizations that are very willing to help us. And again, this is where it's very important that in our service first units that we aggressively seek collaboration. We can get so much more done when we work together as agencies, but also in partnership with others. So the first example that I wanted to bring up relative to cultural resources has to do with some historic structure preservation on the monument. This is a picture of the Pine Ranch, pretty dilapidated, homesteaded back in the early 1900s. We had a need as 2 agencies to stabilize these cultural resources on the monument. We also were looking for opportunities to engage youth, as we all are, in public land management. And we were looking to develop a closer relationship with our tribes in the area, for which the monument had some very special and traditional lands. So we partnered together, the two agencies, along with the Kaibab tribe in northern northern Arizona, and implemented this program, which teaches tribal youth historic preservation skills. In this shot, here are some of the interns working in the carpenter shop at Zion National Park, being taught by specialists from the Western Center for Historic Preservation. These students got some great hands-on experience and also training through the Preservation Center, as well as their field instructors. This slide shows the ranch house after stabilization. In the photo, we have members of the Southern Paiute tribal government, the interns themselves, the instructors, the field instructors, which were employees of the BLM and the Park Service on the monument, and also the descendants of folks that actually homesteaded this piece of land. They had a ranch nearby. It was great to get them all together. Some of the things that we learned from just having these different groups together and sharing stories has added immeasurably to our understanding of the history of the monument. And I'm going to jump to a couple of examples from the Southern Nevada Agency partnership. Certainly this is one of our most well-developed service first groupings, where all four agencies work together there in Southern Nevada. And they have many, many partners, state and county government, universities, local schools, the medical community, friends groups for the various units. And the way SNAP is organized, they have various teams that include members of each of the agencies. And they work together to develop projects on agency lands throughout Southern Nevada. And just a couple of statistics here. The SNAP Wilderness team worked with Friends of Nevada Wilderness and gathered together groups of volunteers on 25 different projects in 2011. And the work they did in terms of the amount of materials removed and areas restored was just tremendous. Another group, the SNAP Restoration Team, in 2011 accomplished nearly 2,700 acres of habitat restoration. Again, members of their crews from the agencies, as well as volunteers. I believe this photo is an AmeriCorps group. Just tremendous effort put forth to benefit the lands of all four agencies in Southern Nevada. So just to recap a couple things that I think we've learned, certainly at Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument, about collaboration, is that all partners contribute and all partners benefit. We need to respect each agency's mission. Relationships have to be developed, and they have to be based on honesty, open communication, and of course from those come trust. It's best to start out focusing on shared issues and opportunities. And of course it's critical to establish processes and communication lines for working together. And we won't agree on everything, and that's fine. But if we have the open communication and we're honest with each other, we can still move forward on those issues that we share common concerns. And a couple service first principles, I guess, again, based on our experience, there's not a one-size-fits-all model for service first collaboration. Each situation is different. Each service first effort must be tailored to that situation. we found that service first must be developed using adaptive management. We have to have that assessment and feedback, and then the ability to make changes based on that feedback. And since there is no single service first model, field units have to decide how to enhance partnerships by engaging their staff and asking the public a simple question: where does it make sense to share resources? So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. I have a couple questions here for you. Do you have any specific thoughts on why Park Service employees should get more involved in Service First? Where do you see the biggest opportunities for National Park Service and other agencies to collaborate under Service First?
Well, I think there are a number of situations in resources management. Again, we have many issues that are transboundary in nature. We're also all serving the public. Visitor education and that sort of thing is very important. So as Deputy Director Odell mentioned, we have a number of visitor centers and other facilities like that our four agencies jointly share and manage.
Great, thank you. What ideas do you have to link the Secretary of Interior's America Great Outdoors initiative with Service First?
Well, I think that, again, because many of the resource issues and values of our lands overlap across the agencies. As America's Great Outdoors initiatives take place, I think it's an opportunity for us to build on the strengths that each agency brings to the table. Certainly at Parashant, we found that the BLM brought a very strong capability in multiple use management, and the Park Service has a great depth of experience in visitor use management. And so, taking advantage of the skills that we have in our agencies, I think is paramount and a great opportunity.
Great. I don't believe Chris asked this question the last hour. Do you have thoughts on how to best submit joint funding proposals under Service First?
Well, I think there's some opportunities out there, and I'm not sure right now. This might be a better question for Chris if there are any Service First funding initiatives planned. But we found that. Again, each of our agencies at Parashant, BLM, and Park Service had strengths and funding opportunities available. And, we tailored our proposals to take advantage of those things. And so, again, as we talked about a little bit earlier, understanding how we share funding and what the mechanisms are is very important. And that starts out with developing the project proposal.
Okay, great, thank you. So what have been some of the early successes that you've seen in your career with Service First?
Well, again, I'll draw on Parashant Monument. I think one of the great things that we saw is how the staff kind of developed together. We brought folks in that were Park Service employees, BLM employees that had been in those agencies for a number of years. And this was a major change for them. Everything changed. I mean, the culture changed, processes changed. Geez, we were managing this land before. Why are we changing the way we're doing it? But I think what was great was to see people rally around kind of this new mission identified in the Monument Proclamation. That was one of the most satisfying things, is to see people from each of the agencies relying on each other, seeking them out, and utilizing the expertise that they had that might have been special to their position, but also may have been best developed within their agency.
Great. For agencies that are, or for offices that are either expanding or just starting off with Service First, what are some of the obstacles that you can anticipate that they may see, and do you have any suggestions for overcoming some of those obstacles?
Well, as the deputy directors pointed out, there are a number of administrative hurdles, and some of those at times are due simply to a lack of understanding. And so throughout our agencies, we need to train and bring about an understanding of what Service First is about. Because a lot of the obstacles I think that we ran into administratively were simply people didn't understand what this collaborative management, or Service First particularly, was all about. And certainly that was true within the Park Service, as we in the Fish and Wildlife Service came in a little bit later into Service First, whereas the BLM and Forest Service have been working at it for a while. So there's a learning curve there, and it's very important that we don't just develop that understanding among the field unit staffs, but also at higher levels in the organization.
Okay. Great, thank you. Here's a question from folks out there listening. Are you aware of any Service First veteran efforts? Is there a joint agency technology site that publishes the activities across each agency? I'm not aware of that. Certainly we have the Service First national website, and Chris may be able to answer this question a little bit earlier, or a little bit better, but at Parashant we made great use of both Park Service and BLM web capabilities. We did a joint management plan there. It was published in both places. Other materials are put up there, but I think this is a place where we have room to grow. Great. Are you aware of tools that are in place in order to monitor progress with Service First projects, program implementation, and adjust those projects or programs as they're being implemented? I think I don't know if there are any standard tools, but certainly, as I talked about adaptive management, as we're planning our activities and our overall management, we need to make sure that those feedback and assessment points are built into our projects as well as our management activities. Certainly we develop annual work plans, those sorts of things to track accomplishments, and I think those are absolutely critical. Great. Where and how are stakeholders engaged during collaborative and adaptive management? Well, hopefully collaborators as well as some of our partners are brought into the early planning. As we were developing the monument management plan at Parashant, we had a number of agencies and organizations that were involved as cooperating agencies in the development of that document. So I think it's important that it starts with the planning. And in some cases where units, we had the advantage perhaps of being a new creation, so to speak, and so we were starting out with our first management plan. For other situations, it may be when we do a forest plan revision or some sort of planning update, something like that. I would bring them in as early as possible. Okay, great. You mentioned before that you thought it was important for dual delegated offices, or where people are working very closely together, to have a clear chain of command to who your manager is. Someone's asking, do you think it works for there just to be one dual delegated manager that folks will report to? I think it does, and it certainly can. It was early decided at Parashant, for example, that both agencies would have a manager. But that started out as a single manager with two assistant managers. The monument manager was a BLM employee, and the two assistant monument managers, one was BLM and Park Service. It then evolved to where we have co-equal managers at this point.
But again, that's part of the adaptive management process, I think. I think there are opportunities in the future at Parashant where it may make sense to have a single manager.
Okay, great. We've had a number of questions about overhead rate. What is the overhead rate assessed on a reimbursable agreement under the Service First Authority?
Well, I can't answer that specifically. I can tell you at Parashant we tried not to tax ourselves with overhead costs going back and forth between the agencies. There were some projects that, given the type of project, for example, construction, where there were agency requirements to charge overhead, to have contingency funds set aside as part of the construction program. So those certainly we need to meet those agency constraints. But we tried not to do that because we found we'd be doing that back and forth on a continual basis, and it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to us.
Okay, great. And then for the most part, the Service First Authority allows agencies to waive that overhead rate.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you tell us about a time when collaborating between agencies allowed a project to move forward or be completed that it wouldn't have been possible if agencies had just stuck to their stovepipes?
Yeah, I think one of the examples that I brought up relative to the cave biological inventories is a good example. Again, that was a case where we were able to get funding through the Park Service research fund sources. But, we took the attitude that we were managing cave resources across the monument. And so we didn't restrict our activities only to cave resources on National Park Service lands. And so I think if we had taken that attitude on it, certainly the project would not have gotten done.
Okay, great. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience out there based on your experience?
Well, I think that we can do cooperative and collaborative management in many different ways, and it doesn't necessarily take service first, but there are we have authority under Service First to utilize some tools that we may not have at our disposal. It's an opportunity, I think, for our agencies to work closer together. The more we work together, I think that helps in terms of a broader management, whether we're talking about cultural systems, biological systems, administrative systems, what have you. And I think we can only improve as we understand each agency's roles in public land management.
Okay, great. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
We're going to, before we take a break, I'm going to ask everyone to type the number of people listening in at or participating at their location into the question box so that we have an accurate count of how many people are participating in the workshop today. We are going to take a break until 1:30 Mountain Time, 3:30 Eastern Time. So I hope you guys will join us shortly. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeff.
Welcome.